The morning I walked into the courthouse with a cardboard box full of evidence, my hands were steady for the first time in 11 months. 11 months of sleepless dawns, of finding my own signature forged on documents I had never seen, of watching the man I had loved for 14 years smile at me across the breakfast table while he was quietly, methodically erasing me from my own life. My name is Corinne Ashford, and on that bright Tuesday morning in April, with the Georgia sun streaming through the tall courthouse windows and the dogwood trees blooming white and pink along the sidewalk outside, I was about to do something that would make the evening news in 3 states. I was about to stand in front of a judge, a packed courtroom gallery, and 2 people who had conspired to leave me with nothing, not my home, not my business, not my children's college funds, not even my dignity, and I was about to show the world exactly who they really were. If you believe in justice, in the quiet strength of someone who refuses to be broken, in kindness even when the world gives you every reason to be cruel, then I ask you right now to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs to hear this today, and subscribe to our channel. Because this story is not about revenge. It is about what happens when a woman who was taught to be gentle discovers that gentleness does not mean weakness, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply tell the truth. I need to take you back to the beginning, to the version of Corinne who had no idea what was coming, so you can understand just how far I fell and how impossible the climb back up seemed at the time. 14 years before that courthouse morning, I married Desmond Hale in a small ceremony at his parents' farmhouse outside Savannah. I was 24. He was 27. I had just finished my MBA and had already launched a modest but promising interior design consultancy that I ran out of a rented office downtown. Desmond was a commercial real estate broker, charming in the way that certain Southern men can be. He opened doors, he remembered your mother's birthday, he brought wildflowers from the roadside without being asked. Our wedding was simple. 60 guests, a potluck reception, his grandmother's lace tablecloth draped over a folding table. I wore my mother's dress, taken in at the waist and hemmed above the ankle because Mama had been taller than me by 4 inches. We danced to a song his cousin played on an acoustic guitar, and when he looked at me that afternoon with the golden light falling across his face, I believed with every cell in my body that I had found a partner for life. For the first 7 years, I had no reason to doubt that belief. We worked hard, side by side in many ways, building separate careers that fed into each other. My design firm, Ashford Interiors, grew from a one-woman operation into a team of 11 with a client list that included boutique hotels, upscale restaurants, and residential projects across the Southeast. Desmond's brokerage also expanded, and because we operated in overlapping worlds, he found the properties, I helped clients envision what those properties could become, we referred business to each other constantly. We bought a house in the historic district, a rambling Victorian with a wraparound porch and a magnolia tree in the backyard so old that its trunk was wider than our dining table. We had 2 children, a daughter named Louisa, who arrived when I was 28, and a son named Callum, who came along 3 years later. Life was full and sometimes exhausting and occasionally mundane, the way any good marriage is when the initial electricity settles into something warmer and steadier. I did not see the cracks forming because I was too busy building, too busy loving, too busy trusting. The woman's name was Petra Svensson. She arrived in Savannah 8 years into my marriage, hired as a leasing coordinator at a commercial firm that competed with Desmond's. She was 30, Scandinavian by heritage though she had grown up in Connecticut, tall and angular with ice blonde hair she wore in a severe ponytail and the kind of confidence that enters a room before the person does. I met her at an industry mixer and found her sharp and funny and a little intimidating. When Desmond mentioned a few weeks later that Petra had left her firm and was looking for independent brokerage work, I was the one who suggested he bring her on as an associate. I want you to sit with that for a moment. I was the one who opened the door. I invited her into our professional life, and by extension, into our personal one, because I believed in helping other women succeed in an industry that could be ruthlessly competitive. That generosity would cost me nearly everything I had. The affair did not begin immediately. Looking back with the clarity that devastation eventually provides, I believe it started approximately 2 years after Petra joined Desmond's firm, which would have placed it around the 10-year mark of our marriage. The signs were there, but they were subtle in the way that betrayals by intelligent people always are. Desmond started working later, but his explanations were always plausible: a difficult closing, a client dinner, a property tour that ran long. He upgraded his wardrobe gradually, trading his usual khakis and rumpled blazers for slim-cut suits and Italian shoes, and when I teased him about his sudden interest in fashion, he laughed and said Petra had told him he needed to look more polished if he wanted to compete for luxury listings. He bought a new cologne that I didn't recognize, and when I asked about it, he said it had been a gift from a grateful client. These were small things, individually meaningless, collectively a pattern I was too close to see. What I did not know, what I would not discover until much later, was that Desmond and Petra's relationship had moved beyond the personal and into the financial in ways that were far more dangerous than an affair alone. Somewhere around year 11 of our marriage, Desmond began systematically restructuring our joint assets. He convinced me to sign refinancing documents for our home, telling me we were locking in a lower interest rate. He suggested we move my business accounts to a new bank that offered better terms, and because he had always handled the more complex financial aspects of our lives while I focused on the creative work that drove my business, I signed where he pointed and trusted what he told me. In reality, he was draining equity from our home, redirecting portions of my business revenue into accounts I didn't know existed, and slowly, deliberately transferring ownership of shared investments into structures controlled by Petra's name or shell companies they had created together. The man I slept beside every night was hollowing out our life like a termite working through a load-bearing wall. From the outside, the house still looked beautiful. From the inside, it was ready to collapse. The collapse came on a Wednesday morning in May, 13 years into our marriage. I arrived at my office to find a certified letter from our bank informing me that our business line of credit had been frozen due to irregularities in the account. Confused, I called the bank and was told that the primary account holder, listed as Desmond, though the business was mine, had requested a transfer of the account to a different institution. I had not authorized this. I had not been consulted. I drove to Desmond's office with the letter in my hand and a feeling in my stomach like the floor was tilting beneath me, and when I arrived, his assistant, a young man named Fletcher who had always been friendly and slightly nervous around me, told me that Desmond was in a meeting. I waited for 45 minutes in the reception area, and when the conference room door finally opened, it was Desmond and Petra who walked out together, and the look that passed between them when they saw me sitting there, a flicker of panic quickly masked by composure, told me everything that 13 years of trust had hidden. I confronted Desmond that afternoon in our kitchen, with the May sunlight streaming through the windows and Louisa's watercolor paintings taped to the refrigerator and Callum's soccer cleats kicked off by the back door, all the artifacts of the life I thought we shared. He denied everything at first, smoothly and convincingly, the way a man denies things when he has been rehearsing the denial for years. The bank issue was a misunderstanding, he said. Petra was a colleague and nothing more. I was being paranoid, he said, and maybe I should talk to someone about the stress I was under. That word, paranoid, was a knife, because it made me doubt my own perception, which was exactly its purpose. For 3 agonizing weeks, I almost believed him. I almost let it go. I almost accepted the version of reality he was constructing around me like a cage. What saved me was an accident. Louisa, who was 11 at the time, borrowed Desmond's tablet one Saturday morning to watch a cooking show, and she came to me in the backyard where I was deadheading the roses with a puzzled look on her face and the tablet in her hands. "Mama," she said, "why does Daddy have a bank app with a different name on it?" I took the tablet gently, as though it were something fragile and possibly explosive, and I looked at the screen, and my entire world fractured along a fault line I hadn't known existed. The app was for an account at an institution I had never heard of, registered under a business name I did not recognize, and the balance was $473,000, nearly $500,000, money that I would later confirm had been siphoned from our joint accounts, from my business revenues, from the equity in our home, over a period of almost 3 years. $473,000. My hands were shaking so badly that I nearly dropped the tablet on the paving stones. I did not confront Desmond again. Not yet. Instead, I did something that went against every instinct I had as a wife, as someone who had been raised to talk things through, to assume good faith, to give people the benefit of the doubt. I became quiet. I became watchful. And I began to build a case. I contacted a forensic accountant named Genevieve Prue, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses perpetually perched on her head and a reputation for being the most meticulous financial investigator in the state. I sat in her office on a bright June afternoon and laid out everything I had found, and when I was finished, she looked at me over those reading glasses with an expression that was equal parts sympathy and professional excitement, the look of someone who has just been handed a deeply complicated puzzle, and she said, "Mrs. Ashford, I think what you are describing may constitute fraud." Genevieve spent the next 4 months unraveling the financial web that Desmond and Petra had woven. What she found was staggering in its scope and its audacity. They had created 3 shell companies, 2 registered in Petra's name and 1 in the name of a cousin of Desmond's who lived in Nevada and who, it turned out, had no idea his identity was being used. They had forged my signature on at least 7 documents, including a power of attorney that gave Desmond unilateral control over assets that should have required my consent. They had diverted client payments meant for my business into their private accounts. They had taken out a second mortgage on our home without my knowledge. And, perhaps most painfully, they had opened a joint savings account, Desmond and Petra together, into which they had been depositing what Genevieve estimated was approximately $12,000 a month, every month, for over 2 years. The total amount of assets they had stolen or redirected exceeded $1.2 million. I remember the afternoon Genevieve presented me with her final report. It was October by then, 5 months after I had first discovered the hidden account, and the autumn light was coming through her office window in long amber shafts. She slid a bound document across the desk, 214 pages of bank statements, forged signatures, corporate filings, transaction records, and correspondence between Desmond and Petra that made it clear their plan was not simply to steal from me but to eventually push me out of my own business entirely and claim it as their own. They had been laying the groundwork to argue that Ashford Interiors was actually a joint venture in which Desmond held a controlling interest, using the forged documents as evidence. If they had succeeded, would have lost my company, my home, the college funds I had set aside for Louisa and Callum, and quite possibly custody leverage in any divorce proceeding, because Desmond would have appeared to be the financially stable parent while I appeared to be the one with nothing. It was a plan of extraordinary cruelty, executed with patience and precision, and if an 11-year-old girl had not borrowed her father's tablet on a Saturday morning, it might have worked. I hired an attorney named Rowan Callister, a woman in her early 40s who had spent 15 years in family law and had a reputation for representing clients who had been victims of financial abuse within marriages. Rowan was calm and direct and had a way of making you feel that the situation, however terrible, was manageable. She reviewed Genevieve's report, and when she looked up, she said something I will never forget. She said, "Corinne, you don't just have grounds for divorce. You have grounds for criminal referral." We discussed our options over several long meetings, sitting in her conference room with its view of the Savannah River, and together we constructed a strategy that was designed not merely to end my marriage and recover my assets but to ensure that what Desmond and Petra had done would be exposed completely, undeniably, and on the public record. The months between October and the following April were the hardest of my life. I had to live in the same house with Desmond, sleep in the same bed, share meals, attend parent-teacher conferences, act as though everything was normal, while carrying the weight of what I knew like a stone in my chest. Some mornings I would stand in the shower with the hot water running and press my forehead against the tile and cry so hard that my whole body shook, and then I would turn off the water and dry my face and go downstairs and make breakfast for my children and smile at the man who was stealing my future. I learned during those months that strength is not the absence of pain. Strength is putting on your shoes and walking forward when every step feels like it might be the one that finally breaks you. I did it for Louisa. I did it for Callum. I did it for the woman I had been before Desmond decided she was someone who could be discarded. I also discovered, during those months, who my real friends were. My sister-in-law, Margot, Desmond's own sister, came to me one afternoon in January after I had finally confided in her, and she sat at my kitchen table and wept and held my hands and said, "I love my brother, but what he is doing is unforgivable, and I will stand with you." Margot became my anchor during those dark months, the person I called at 6 in the morning when the anxiety was so bad I could not breathe, the person who watched Louisa and Callum on the evenings I had to meet with Rowan and Genevieve, the person who reminded me, again and again, that I was not crazy, I was not paranoid, and I was not alone. My best friend since college, a woman named Theodora Vance, flew in from Portland twice during that period and slept on my couch and brought me soup and made me laugh and told me stories about terrible people she had known who had eventually gotten exactly what they deserved. And my mother, Eleonora, 81 years old and sharp as a blade, drove up from her retirement community in Florida and looked me in the eye and said, "Corinne, you are an Ashford woman, and Ashford women do not crumble. You will get through this, and you will be magnificent." April arrived, and with it, the court date that Rowan had been building toward for months. We had filed for divorce on grounds of adultery and financial fraud. We had filed a separate civil suit for the recovery of misappropriated assets. And Rowan had, with my consent, referred the criminal evidence to the district attorney's office, which had opened its own investigation. The hearing that Tuesday morning was technically a preliminary matter, a motion regarding the freezing of contested assets, but Rowan had structured our filing in a way that required a substantial evidentiary presentation, and she had done so deliberately, because she wanted the evidence to enter the public record at the earliest possible opportunity. She wanted sunlight on what Desmond and Petra had done, because sunlight, as she told me more than once, is the most powerful disinfectant. I walked into that courthouse at 9 in the morning with the sun on my face and my mother beside me and Margot on my other side and Theodora behind me, and I was wearing a navy blue dress I had bought for the occasion, simple and professional, and my hands were steady. Desmond was already there with his attorney, a man named Prescott something who looked expensive and slightly bored, and Petra was in the gallery, sitting 3 rows back, wearing a white blouse as though whiteness could communicate innocence. They both looked calm. They had no idea what was about to happen because they had no idea how much I knew, how much I had documented, how thoroughly Genevieve had traced every stolen dollar and forged signature. Rowan began her presentation, and the courtroom, which had been murmuring with the usual pre-hearing restlessness, went silent. She projected documents on the courtroom screen. Bank statements showing transfers from my business accounts into shell companies. Side-by-side comparisons of my real signature and the forgeries, accompanied by an affidavit from a handwriting expert. Corporate filings that listed Petra as the director of companies funded entirely with money taken from my family. The second mortgage documents with my forged signature. The power of attorney I had never granted. Emails between Desmond and Petra discussing how to shift ownership of Ashford Interiors away from me, including one, I will never forget this, in which Petra wrote, she trusts him completely, which makes this almost too easy. Rowan read that email aloud, and I heard a gasp from somewhere in the gallery, and I looked at Desmond, and for the first time in all the years I had known him, I saw fear on his face. Real fear. Not the performative concern of a man who has been caught in a lie but the animal terror of someone who realizes the ground beneath him is gone. Prescott, Desmond's attorney, objected repeatedly, but the judge, a woman named Honorable Ruth Eames, silver-haired and deliberate, who had been on the bench for 22 years, overruled him each time with a tone that grew progressively cooler. The evidence was properly submitted, properly authenticated, and devastating. Rowan presented Genevieve's full report, all 214 pages, and the judge ordered a recess to review it. When we reconvened 2 hours later, Judge Eames looked at Desmond over her glasses, and I could see something in her expression that went beyond judicial neutrality. She granted every motion Rowan had filed. Every contested account was frozen. A forensic audit of all marital assets was ordered. Temporary sole custody of Louisa and Callum was granted to me. Desmond was ordered to vacate our family home within 72 hours. And the judge noted, for the record, that the evidence presented raised serious concerns regarding criminal fraud, identity theft, and forgery, and that she would be forwarding her own observations to the district attorney's office alongside the referral already made. Desmond did not look at me as he left the courtroom. Petra, sitting in the gallery, had turned the color of old paper, and when she stood to leave, her legs seemed uncertain beneath her, as though the floor had become unreliable. Outside the courthouse, standing on the steps with the April sun warming my face and the dogwood petals drifting like confetti across the sidewalk, I felt something I had not felt in almost a year. I felt like myself. Not the diminished, doubting, hollowed-out version of myself that Desmond's betrayal had created, but the real Corinne, the one who built things, the one who loved fiercely, the one who knew her own worth. My mother squeezed my hand so tightly I could feel the thin bones of her fingers, and she said nothing, because nothing needed to be said. The weeks and months that followed brought a cascade of consequences for Desmond and Petra that I could not have fully anticipated. The local newspaper, which had a reporter covering the courthouse beat, picked up the story because the financial amounts were significant and because Desmond was a known figure in the Savannah real estate community. The article was factual and detailed, and it was shared widely, and within days, Desmond's professional reputation was in ruins. His clients pulled their listings. His business partners distanced themselves publicly. His real estate license was placed under review by the state board. Petra fared no better. Her involvement in the shell companies was now public record, and she was named as a co-defendant in my civil suit and as a person of interest in the criminal investigation. She lost her own real estate credentials. She was asked to resign from 2 community boards on which she served. And the industry that she had worked so hard to build a career in closed its doors to her with a swiftness that, while satisfying, also made me realize how fragile professional standing really is when it is built on deception. The criminal case moved forward over the summer. Desmond was charged with fraud, forgery, and identity theft, the last charge related to his use of his cousin's name on one of the shell companies. His cousin, a man named Garrett who lived in Reno and worked as a high school wrestling coach, had been horrified to learn that his identity had been used and had cooperated fully with investigators. Petra was charged with conspiracy and fraud. Both of them faced the possibility of significant prison time, and both of them, for the first time, seemed to understand that what they had done was not a clever financial maneuver but a crime with real victims and real consequences. I want to pause here and tell you about something that happened during this period that surprised me, because it revealed a dimension of this story I had not expected. Desmond's mother, a woman named Constance Hale who I had loved deeply for 14 years and who had treated me as a daughter from the day I married her son, called me one afternoon in late June. I almost didn't answer, because I was not sure what she would say, and I was afraid it would be something defensive, something that would force me to see her differently. But I answered, and Constance's voice was thick with tears, and she said, "Corinne, I am so ashamed. I did not raise him to be this man. I don't know where I failed, but I need you to know that what he did to you is not who we are as a family. Please don't take my grandchildren from me." I sat on my porch with the phone pressed to my ear and the June heat heavy around me, and I cried, because Constance's pain was real, and her shame was real, and her love for Louisa and Callum was real, and in that moment I understood that Desmond's choices had created victims far beyond me. They had wounded his own mother, his sister who had chosen my side, his children who were old enough to understand that something terrible had happened even though I had shielded them from the details. Betrayal is not a private act. It radiates outward, touching everyone in its path, and the people who suffer most are often the ones who had no part in the betrayal at all. I told Constance that she would always be part of her grandchildren's lives. I told her that my fight was with Desmond, not with her, and that I knew the difference between a man and his mother. She thanked me, and we stayed on the phone for a long time without saying much, just breathing together, 2 women connected by love for the same children, separated by the actions of a man they had both trusted. The divorce was finalized in September, 14 months after I had first found that hidden account on Desmond's tablet. The settlement, driven by the overwhelming evidence of fraud, was comprehensive. I retained sole ownership of Ashford Interiors and all its assets. I received the family home. I was awarded full custody of Louisa and Callum with supervised visitation for Desmond. The misappropriated funds were ordered returned in full, though the actual recovery would take longer as accounts were untangled and shell companies dissolved. Desmond was ordered to pay restitution and substantial alimony. He left that final hearing with nothing but his name and the consequences attached to it. Petra's story took a different turn that I did not expect. In October, nearly a month after my divorce was finalized, I received a letter at my home. It was handwritten, on plain stationery, and it was from Petra. I opened it at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold beside me and the morning light coming through the window, and I read it 3 times before I put it down. She wrote that she was not asking for forgiveness because she knew she did not deserve it. She wrote that she had spent years telling herself that what she and Desmond were doing was simply business, that I was not being harmed because I didn't know, that ignorance was a kind of protection, and that she had only recently understood how monstrously self-serving that logic was. She wrote about her own childhood, about a father who had been a con man of sorts, a charming and unreliable man who had taught her by example that the world was something to be manipulated rather than lived in honestly, and that she had spent her adult life unlearning that lesson and failing, spectacularly, in the unlearning. She wrote that she understood if I burned the letter without reading it. She wrote that she was cooperating fully with the prosecution and intended to plead guilty. And she wrote, in the final line, that she hoped someday I would know that her regret was genuine, even if it had come too late to matter. I did not burn the letter. I put it in a drawer, and I thought about it for a long time. I am still thinking about it. Forgiveness is not something I owe anyone, and I have learned to be suspicious of apologies that arrive only after consequences do. But I also know that people are complicated, that the human capacity for self-deception is nearly infinite, and that regret, even late regret, even regret born partly from fear of punishment, can still contain something real. I have not forgiven Petra. I may never forgive her. But I have allowed the possibility that her letter was sincere to exist alongside my anger, and I have found that holding both of those things at once has not weakened me. If anything, it has made me stronger, because it means I am choosing what I feel rather than being controlled by it. Desmond eventually pleaded guilty to reduced charges as part of a deal with the district attorney. He served 11 months in a county facility and was released to probation with conditions that included continued restitution payments and the surrender of his real estate license. Petra received probation and community service and moved back to Connecticut. I do not know what became of her after that, and I have chosen not to find out. Some stories end with neat resolutions for every character, but life is not a story, and some people simply exit the narrative, and you let them go because holding on to them, even in anger, is a weight you no longer need to carry. The years since the courthouse morning have been ones of rebuilding, and I use that word deliberately because rebuilding is not the same as restoring. I did not try to reconstruct the life I had before. That life was built on a foundation that included Desmond, and that foundation was rotten, and trying to rebuild on rotten wood would have been foolishness. Instead, I built something new. I expanded Ashford Interiors into commercial hospitality design, a field I had always been drawn to but had never pursued because Desmond had subtly discouraged it, steering me toward residential work that kept my business smaller and more controllable. Within 2 years, the firm had doubled in size. I hired a chief financial officer, a brilliant young woman named Renata Forsyth who implemented financial controls and transparency measures that ensured no one would ever again have the opportunity to do what Desmond had done. I spoke at industry conferences about financial literacy for business owners, about the importance of understanding every document you sign, about the ways that trust, while beautiful and necessary, must be accompanied by verification. I did not name Desmond in these talks. I didn't need to. Everyone knew the story, and the lessons spoke for themselves. Louisa and Callum have grown into remarkable young people, and I say that not with a mother's bias but with genuine awe at their resilience. Louisa, who is now 17, went through a difficult period after the divorce, a period of anger and confusion and grief that manifested in withdrawn silences and sudden tears and questions I sometimes could not answer. She asked me once, sitting on the porch swing in the late afternoon light, whether she was supposed to stop loving her father, and I told her no, absolutely not, that she could love him and be angry at him and be hurt by him all at the same time, and that her feelings did not need to be simple or consistent to be valid. Callum, younger and in some ways more adaptable, struggled differently, not with anger but with anxiety, a persistent fear that things he trusted could be taken away without warning. He saw a therapist for 2 years, a gentleman named Dr. Whitaker, who helped him develop tools for managing the uncertainty that his father's betrayal had planted in him. Both of my children have seen their father since his release, in supervised settings that have gradually become less formal, and I have not interfered with that process because whatever Desmond did to me, he is still their father, and they have the right to define that relationship for themselves. I want to tell you about one more moment, because it captures something I have struggled to put into words about this entire experience. It was a Sunday morning, about 2 years after the divorce, and I was sitting on the back steps of our house, my house now, watching Callum throw a tennis ball for our dog, a ridiculous golden retriever named Biscuit who could not catch anything but tried with such enthusiastic incompetence that watching her was its own kind of therapy. Louisa was inside practicing piano, and the notes drifted through the open window, something by Debussy, halting but lovely. The magnolia tree was in bloom, its flowers like white cups holding the morning light, and the air smelled the way Savannah air smells in spring, like honey and river water and possibility. And I realized, sitting there on the warm wooden steps with coffee in my hands and my children nearby and the dog failing gloriously to catch a tennis ball, that I was happy. Not the performative happiness of someone trying to prove they have moved on, but the deep, quiet happiness of someone who has walked through fire and discovered that fire, while it burns, also purifies. I had been stripped of illusions, and what remained was real. My strength was real. My love for my children was real. My work was real. My friendships, Margot, Theodora, my mother, were real. And the life I had built from the wreckage was not a consolation prize. It was the life I was supposed to have, the one I had been moving toward all along, and Desmond's betrayal, as devastating as it had been, had cleared the path to reach it. I do not tell this story to celebrate destruction, even though the title might suggest that. I did not set out to destroy Desmond or Petra. I set out to protect myself and my children and to recover what was rightfully mine, and the destruction of their reputations and their freedom was a consequence of their own choices, not my vindictiveness. The truth is its own force. When you stand in front of a judge and present documented, verified, indisputable truth, you do not need to be cruel. You do not need to embellish. You do not need to perform outrage or demand sympathy. You simply need to lay the facts on the table and let them speak, and if the facts are damning, then it is the person who created those facts who bears responsibility for the damage, not the person who revealed them. I destroyed them publicly, yes, but only because they had tried to destroy me privately, in the dark, in silence, and the only weapon I had was light. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment right now to like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, someone who might be going through their own battle, their own season of betrayal or loss or confusion, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Every like, every comment, every share helps our community grow and help stories like this reach the people who need to hear them most. I want to ask you something before I finish. Think about the people in your life who have stood by you during your hardest moments. The Margots, the Theodoras, the mothers who drove up from Florida with fire in their eyes and love in their hearts. Think about how different your story would be without them. And then, if you feel moved to, leave a comment below telling us about that person. Tell us who held you up when you were falling. Tell us who reminded you of your own strength when you had forgotten it. Because those people deserve to be named and celebrated, and because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do for each other is simply say, I see you. You mattered. Thank you. My name is Corinne Ashford. I was married for 14 years to a man who tried to erase me. He took my money, he forged my name, he shared a bed with me while planning my ruin, and when I discovered what he had done, he called me paranoid and hoped I would believe him. I did not believe him. I gathered evidence with the patience of someone who understands that justice is not a sprint but a marathon. I surrounded myself with people who loved me honestly. I walked into a courthouse on a bright April morning, and I told the truth, and the truth was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. I am not the woman Desmond married. I am not the woman he tried to diminish. I am the woman who survived him, and I am better, not because of what he did, but because of what I chose to do in response. I chose to fight. I chose to protect my children. I chose to rebuild rather than retreat. And on the good days, the days when the magnolia is blooming and the dog is chasing tennis balls and my daughter's piano music floats through the open window, I choose something even harder and even more important than all of that. I choose to be grateful. Not for the pain, I will never be grateful for the pain, but for the person the pain revealed me to be. She was in there all along, that fierce and capable woman, waiting beneath the surface of a marriage that had become a prison without walls. Desmond tried to steal everything, but the one thing he could never take was the thing that mattered most. He could never take who I am. And who I am, it turns out, is someone worth fighting for.